The rain fell softly over the small town of Ridgefield, wrapping the streets in a dull gray haze. Inside a modest hospital room, a man lay weakly on the bed, his breathing shallow but his eyes still full of life. Beside him sat a young man, Ethan, his hands trembling as he held his father's. "Dad, please," Ethan whispered. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine." His father smiled weakly. "Son, there's something I need you to promise me." Ethan leaned closer, tears already pooling in his eyes. "Anything, Dad, anything. Take care of Grace," his father said, his voice almost fading. She's done more for us than you know. Promise me you'll look after her." Ethan's throat tightened. Grace and his stepmother. She'd entered their lives when Ethan was 13 after his mother's death. At first, Ethan couldn't stand her. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and too kind. He thought she was pretending. But over the years, she had proved her love in 1,000 quiet ways, packing his lunches, waiting up late when he was out, celebrating every small achievement like it was her own. "I promise." "Dad," Ethan said firmly, his voice cracking. "I'll take care of her, always." His father smiled, a tear rolling down his pale cheek. "That's my boy." And those were his last words. The monitor went flat, the sound of life slipping away echoing through the sterile room. Ethan broke down, burying his face in his father's chest as Grace stepped forward, her own eyes wet but steady. She wrapped her arms around Ethan, whispering softly, "He loved you more than anything." In that moment, Ethan felt a strange mix of pain and peace. He had lost his father, but he still had Grace. Days turned into weeks, and the house that once held laughter now felt cold and silent. Grace moved quietly through the halls, keeping the place spotless, making sure Ethan ate, and trying to keep his world from collapsing. But grief changes people. Ethan withdrew into himself, spending long hours at work and longer nights out drinking with friends. Grace never complained. She simply waited, hoping time would heal him. One evening, she set dinner on the table, roast chicken his favorite. But the clock ticked past 9, then 10, and Ethan didn't come home. When he finally stumbled in around midnight, his eyes were red and his shirt wrinkled. "Ethan," Grace said softly, "you haven't eaten all day. Let me fix you a plate." "I'm fine," he muttered, brushing past her. "You need to take care of yourself," she said gently. "Your father wouldn't want— Stop talking about him!" he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Grace flinched. The sound echoed through the quiet kitchen. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean—" Ethan sighed, guilt flickering across his face. "Just leave me alone, Grace, please." She nodded quietly and stepped away. In her room that night, she cried silently into her pillow, praying for the boy she still called her son. Months passed. Ethan threw himself into his career, climbing the ladder in a real estate firm, earning money and recognition. With success came pride, and with pride came distance. Grace was still there, cooking, cleaning, and offering gentle advice. But Ethan stopped listening. When he brought his girlfriend, Lily, home for the first time, Grace prepared a special dinner and wore her nicest dress. She wanted to make a good impression, but Lily barely looked at her. After dinner, Grace began clearing the plates. Lily whispered something to Ethan, and they both laughed quietly. Grace smiled anyway, pretending not to notice. Later that night, as they sat in the living room, Lily said casually, "You know, it's nice that you still let her live here. Most people your age would want privacy." Grace froze. Ethan looked embarrassed but said nothing. "She's family," he muttered. "Still," Lily shrugged. "You're 30, Ethan. You need your own space." Grace quietly excused herself, her heart aching at how easily she was spoken of, like a burden, not a person. Weeks later, Ethan and Lily got engaged. Grace smiled and congratulated them, though inside she felt a sharp pang. She wished Ethan's father could have been there to see it. She helped plan the wedding, paid for half the arrangements with her savings, and even stitched Lily's veil by hand. But after the wedding, things changed. Lily began complaining about how crowded the house felt. She told Ethan she wanted to start fresh, in a new home, just the two of them. Ethan resisted at first. "Grace has nowhere else to go," he said. "She's your stepmother, not your real mom." Lily replied coldly. You've done enough. Those words cut deep, but slowly they took root in Ethan's mind. He started noticing the small things. Grace's quiet footsteps, the old smell of her perfume, the way she still called him son. And one evening, in a moment of weakness, he said the words he'd regret for the rest of his life. Grace, maybe it's time you had your own place. She looked up from the dishes, her hands trembling slightly. My own place? I mean, we're newlyweds now. It's only fair Lily and I get some space. I can help you find a small apartment nearby. Grace stood there silently, eyes glassy, lips trembling. For a long moment she said nothing. Then softly she whispered, Of course, Ethan. You're right. I've stayed too long. Grace, please don't take it that way. She shook her head. No, it's okay. You have your own life now. That's how it should be. That night she packed her few belongings, a framed photo of Ethan and his father, a few clothes, and an old journal. Before leaving, she stood in Ethan's doorway, watching him sleep beside his new wife. She smiled sadly and whispered, Take care of him. Lily, he's all I ever had. Then she walked out into the cold night, never looking back. The next morning, Ethan found a note on the kitchen table. My dear son, I want you to be happy. You don't need to worry about me. I have always believed in you. You'll do great things. Love, Grace. He read it once, twice, and then set it aside. There was a faint heaviness in his chest, but he ignored it. After all, she'd agreed to go. He didn't know it then, but the promise he made on his father's deathbed, the one that had once defined his heart, had just been broken. 6 months had passed since Grace walked out of Ethan's house. The air in the place felt different now, empty, colder somehow, even though the rooms were spotless and the furniture still shone with polish. Lily decorated everything with modern flair, white walls, bright art, chrome light fixtures. Yet no matter how new it looked, it never felt like home. Ethan's mornings had become mechanical. Wake up, dress, coffee, work, sleep, repeat. Grace's laughter, her soft hums while cooking, the faint smell of cinnamon rolls, everything that once filled the house with life was gone. And in the silence, guilt began whispering in the corners. At first, he tried to ignore it. When he thought about her, he told himself she was fine. She always managed. She was strong. She probably found an apartment. Maybe even made new friends. But sometimes, while driving to work, he'd catch himself glancing at the sidewalks, half expecting to see her walking with groceries or wearing that old brown coat of hers. He never did. One evening, after another long day at the office, Ethan came home to find Lily sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. The TV blared softly in the background. Hey, he said, dropping his briefcase. Hey, she replied, barely looking up. He noticed the pile of dishes in the sink. Grace would never have left them there. He tried not to say anything but couldn't stop himself. You didn't cook? Lily looked at him, irritated. I've been working all day too, Ethan. Order something if you're hungry. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Yeah, sure. Later, while eating takeout alone, he thought of Grace again. She never once complained. She'd work all day, then cook, clean, and still smile. She made their house feel safe. Now everything just felt temporary. As months rolled by, Ethan's success at work grew, but his marriage started to crack. Lily was ambitious, restless. She began spending more nights out with friends, more weekends, traveling for work. Ethan pretended not to notice the late-night messages on her phone, the scent of perfume that wasn't hers lingering when she came home. One night, during dinner, she casually said, Ethan, maybe we should take a break. He looked up, shocked. A break? From what? From this, she said, gesturing around. We barely talk. You're always at work. I'm tired. Ethan stared at her, words failing him. I thought this is what you wanted. The house, the career, the space. Yeah, well, space isn't everything, she said coldly. Sometimes I feel like I'm living with a ghost. And maybe she was right. Ethan had become a ghost, haunted by someone who never should have left. That night, he dreamed of his father. In the dream, he was back in the hospital room. His father's hand was cold, the machine still humming. But this time, Grace wasn't there. His father turned to him and said, "You promised me, Ethan. You said you'd take care of her." Ethan jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:12 a.m. The rain was falling outside, just like that night years ago. He sat up, hands shaking, and whispered, "What have I done?" Days later, Ethan returned from work to find the house empty. Again. Lily's closet was half cleared, her jewelry gone, a note on the counter. "I'm sorry, Ethan, I need something more. Don't try to find me." For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly alone. No wife, no father. No Grace, just silence. He sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the note for hours until the words blurred. Then, without really knowing why, he opened the drawer of the living room table. Inside, beneath some papers, was the old note Grace had left the day she moved out. "My dear son, I want you to be happy. You don't need to worry about me. I have always believed in you. You'll do great things. Love, Grace." He read it over and over, his vision clouded with tears. "I have always believed in you." The words felt like a knife. The next morning, Ethan made a decision. He called every old neighbor, every mutual friend, every contact from his father's old company. But no one knew where Grace had gone. Some said she'd moved to another town. Others thought she might have gone to live with distant relatives. No one was sure. He searched through old emails, bills, anything that could help. Then, buried under an old envelope, he found something. A letter from years ago. It was addressed to Grace from a man named Mr. Daniels. Ethan recognized the name. His father's former employee, a kind man who had once left the company to start his own business. He remembered his father saying, Grace helped him get started. Maybe she had gone to him. The next weekend, Ethan drove for hours across the state to the address written on the letter. It was a small town with wide roads and humble homes. He stopped in front of a little bakery with a faded sign, Daniel's Family Bakery. Inside, a woman behind the counter smiled. "Welcome. What can I get you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Daniels," Ethan said. "Sure," she said and called to the back. Moments later, an older man with kind eyes and flour on his apron stepped out. He froze when he saw Ethan. "You're Ethan Walker, aren't you?" "Yes," Ethan replied, surprised. "You knew my father?" "I worked for him years ago," Mr. Daniels said warmly. "And your stepmother, Grace. She helped me start this bakery when I had nothing." Ethan's heart pounded. "You know where she is?" Mr. Daniels smiled softly. "Of course. She's staying with us." For a second, Ethan couldn't breathe. "She's here?" "Yes," the man said gently. "She's in the back garden. She likes to sit there in the evenings with the kids." Ethan followed him through the small bakery and out into a cozy garden where flowers bloomed around a wooden bench. And there she was. Grace sat quietly, wearing a simple sweater, her hair now streaked with gray. She was reading a storybook to two small children who sat close beside her, listening with bright eyes. Her face looked peaceful, softer than he remembered. When she noticed him, she froze. For a moment, neither spoke. The children ran off to play, leaving them alone. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You found me." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. I've been looking for you for months," she smiled faintly. "I didn't think you would." "I made a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "I broke my promise to Dad. I let you go when you needed me most." Grace looked down, tears filling her eyes. "Ethan, you don't owe me anything. You have your own life." "I don't," he said, shaking his head. "Not without you. I pushed you away because I thought I'd moved on. But I didn't. You were the one who held this family together. You were my home, Grace." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Oh, Ethan." "I'm sorry," he whispered, stepping closer. "Please." "Come back home." Grace wiped her tears and smiled sadly. "Home isn't a place, Ethan. It's the people we love. And sometimes we have to lose it to understand what it really means." Mr. Daniels and his wife came out then, watching from a distance, smiling softly. The two children ran back, holding Grace's hands. Ethan looked at them, and for the first time he understood. She wasn't alone. These people had become her family now. But still, deep in his heart, he knew he wanted her back, not just to ease his guilt, but to give her the love and respect she always deserved. He took a deep breath. "Grace, can I visit you again?" She looked at him with tearful eyes, then nodded slowly. Of course, Ethan. You'll always be welcome here. That night, as Ethan drove back home, the sky turned crimson with the setting sun. For the first time in years, he felt peace. He hadn't fixed everything, not yet. But he'd taken the first step toward forgiveness, and deep inside, he heard his father's voice again, whispering, "That's my boy." The sun was setting behind the hills as Ethan parked his car outside the Daniels' small bakery again. It had been 2 weeks since that first reunion with Grace, and though their conversation had been brief, something inside him had changed. He'd been sleeping better. He'd started cooking again. Nothing fancy, but enough to remind him of her. Every morning, he found himself waking earlier, eager to drive the 3 hours it took just to see her for a few minutes. Today, though, he was nervous. He wasn't sure how much forgiveness a mother could give after the pain he'd caused. When he entered the bakery, the smell of fresh bread and sugar filled the air. Mr. Daniels smiled from behind the counter. "She's in the garden again," he said warmly. "She's been expecting you." Ethan nodded and walked toward the back. Grace sat at her usual spot, tending to a small patch of flowers. The late sunlight painted her silver hair gold. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, watching. She looked peaceful, content, something he hadn't seen in years. "Hi," he said softly. Grace turned, her gentle smile reaching her tired eyes. "You came." "Of course," he said. "I couldn't stay away," she chuckled lightly. "You used to say that when you were little. You'd go out to play, then come running home after 5 minutes because you missed me." Ethan smiled, embarrassed. "I guess some things never change." She nodded, brushing dirt from her hands. "Sit with me, Ethan." He did. And for a long while they said nothing. Just the sound of the wind and the chirping birds filled the silence. It wasn't awkward, it was healing. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Grace, I need to tell you everything." She looked at him quietly. "When you left, I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, his voice trembling. "Lily didn't want you around. She said we needed space, that you were controlling my life." I believed her. And in trying to prove I was independent, I forgot what real love looks like. Grace nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "You were young, Ethan. People make mistakes when they're trying to build new lives." He shook his head. "No, I was selfish. I didn't see that everything I had, the house, the company, the comfort, was because of you. Dad's dream lived because you never gave up. I owe you everything." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but she smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything, son. A mother doesn't raise her child expecting repayment. Love doesn't work like that." Ethan looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "Still, I want to make it right." The next few weeks, Ethan became a regular visitor. He'd bring groceries, fix the bakery's old shelves, or help Mr. Daniels deliver bread to nearby towns. Each time, Grace would watch quietly, pride softening her face. One afternoon, as they sat drinking tea together, Grace said, "You know, Ethan, when I left your house, I didn't hate you." He looked up, surprised. "I was heartbroken, yes," she continued, "but I also understood. Sometimes people push away the ones they love the most, not because they don't care, but because they're afraid." "Afraid?" he asked. She nodded. "Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid that love will remind them of their weaknesses. You were grieving your father and learning to be a man. I knew one day you'd understand." Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to keep his tears back. "And now I do. Too late, but I do." Grace reached over, placing her hand gently over his. "No, Ethan, you're right on time." The bakery's business began to grow. Ethan helped Mr. Daniels set up a small delivery network, creating an online page for local customers. Soon orders doubled, and Mr. Daniels would often laugh, saying, "Looks like the Walker blood knows business after all." Grace watched proudly, her eyes shining every time Ethan walked through the bakery door. But inside, Ethan was planning something more. He didn't want her to just visit him. He wanted her home, in the house that was truly hers. A month later, Ethan returned to the Daniels garden with a small box. Inside was a shiny set of keys. "Grace," he said, his heart pounding, "I've been fixing the house. The one you built. The one I made you leave." Grace's eyes widened. "I repainted the walls." "Put your plants back." Even the old swing in the backyard, I repaired it. It's not perfect, but it's waiting for you. Grace stared at him, speechless. I know you've made a life here, and I don't want to take that away, he continued, voice trembling. But if you could just come see it, maybe for a day, I want to show you that it's still your home. Grace's lips quivered. Ethan, please, he whispered. I need you there. I need my mother back. The next morning, Grace agreed. The drive was quiet, filled with emotion. As they neared the old neighborhood, Grace's eyes began to glisten. The familiar trees, the little corner shop, the mailbox she used to paint every summer, it all came rushing back. When Ethan opened the front door, Grace gasped. Everything looked just like before. Her favorite armchair was back by the window. The family photo, Ethan as a child between her and his father, hung once again in the hallway. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. Ethan smiled nervously. It's home. Grace covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. You remembered everything. He nodded, every detail. Because you made this house a home once. I thought maybe I could do the same for you. That evening, they sat together in the living room, just like old times. Ethan made her tea, and Grace smiled softly, holding the warm cup between her hands. Do you remember what your father used to say? She asked. Ethan looked up. What? She smiled. A house stands on walls, but a home stands on forgiveness. He chuckled through his tears. That sounds like him. She reached over, touching his cheek gently. You've become everything he hoped for, Ethan, and more. He looked into her eyes, his voice breaking. I'm only that because of you. Later that night, as he helped her unpack her things, Grace stopped him. Ethan, before we finish, there's something I need to ask. He turned, confused. Are you ready to forgive yourself? She asked. He froze. The question hit deep. I don't know, he admitted quietly. I hurt you. I lost Lily. I ruined so much. Grace smiled. That's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It teaches you to move forward despite it. You can't rebuild your life if you're still living in your guilt. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll try. That's all I ever wanted, she whispered. As night fell, Grace sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Ethan brought her a blanket and smiled. You cold? She shook her head. No, for the first time in a long time. I feel warm. He sat beside her, and together they watched the stars rise above the quiet city. Neither said anything. They didn't need to, because sometimes silence is the loudest kind of love. Morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window, spilling over the familiar countertop where Grace used to bake cookies for Ethan when he was a boy. The same warmth filled the air again, except this time, it wasn't just the smell of cinnamon, but the feeling of peace that had been missing for years. Ethan stood by the stove, awkwardly holding a spatula. I swear, this pancake recipe is cursed, he muttered. Grace laughed softly, her eyes twinkling. You're flipping it too soon, Ethan. Patience makes things better. Pancakes and people. He grinned, turning the spatula carefully. Yeah, well, patience isn't exactly my strength. That's why you need a mother's supervision, she teased. He looked at her, the same woman who had once walked out of this house heartbroken because of him, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. Over the next few weeks, Grace settled back in as if she'd never left. Her garden was revived, filled with daisies and tulips. Ethan would come home from work and find her humming in the kitchen or chatting with neighbors she hadn't seen in years. The neighborhood, once distant, welcomed her back with open arms. Mrs. Hart from next door often came by with fresh jam. Mr. Lynn offered to repaint the fence. Everyone seemed to know that Grace Walker was back, the woman who once held the entire block together with kindness. Ethan felt proud, yet deep inside, there was still a flicker of guilt he couldn't extinguish. He'd done something unforgivable once, and no matter how much he rebuilt, a part of him still whispered, "You don't deserve her forgiveness." One Saturday afternoon, Grace was sitting in the backyard swing when Ethan joined her. She was looking at an old photo album, smiling softly. "Remember this?" she asked, pointing to a picture. Ethan was about 5 years old, his face covered in chocolate cake. He laughed. "Dad's birthday. I destroyed that cake before the candles even lit." Grace chuckled. "You were always impatient when it came to sweetness." He looked at her, realizing how much time he'd wasted chasing the wrong kind of sweetness, money, pride, validation, when everything good had been right here all along. "Grace," he said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" She nodded. "When you left, how did you survive? I mean, I thought you had nothing." Grace's smile softened. "I didn't have much, but Mr. Daniels and his wife took me in. They gave me work, a roof, and something even more important, purpose. I started teaching their children, helping in the bakery. Slowly, life found a rhythm again." Ethan swallowed hard. "You never blamed me?" She shook her head. "Blame builds walls, Ethan. I chose to build bridges instead." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He wandered into his father's old study, the room he hadn't entered since Grace left. Dust covered the shelves, but the faint scent of old wood and ink still lingered. On the desk was a box he didn't remember seeing before. Inside lay a letter, sealed in Grace's handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened it. "Ethan, if you ever find this letter, it means you've finally come home. Not just to the house, but to yourself. I never wanted you to hate me, only to find the strength to see who you truly are. You've always been kind, just lost in your need to prove yourself. Don't let guilt define you. Let love lead you back." "Mom." Ethan sat down, the letter shaking in his hands as tears fell onto the paper. He whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." The following morning, he woke early and decided to make breakfast, a small gesture to show he'd read her words. When Grace came down, she blinked in surprise. "You cooked?" He smiled sheepishly. "Attempted to cook." She laughed, and for a while they ate together in silence. Then the doorbell rang. It was Lily, Ethan's ex-wife. Grace looked at Ethan with quiet concern. He hesitated, then opened the door. "Lily?" he asked, stunned. "What are you doing here?" She looked different, tired, thinner, with regret in her eyes. I heard your mom's back, and I wanted to say something." Grace stood up gently. "It's all right, dear. Come in." Lily nodded, her voice shaky. "I came to apologize. I shouldn't have told Ethan to push you away. I was insecure, jealous of your bond, and when things fell apart between us, I realized it was my fault too." Grace gave her a kind smile. "We all make mistakes when fear guides us, but recognizing them, that's what heals the heart." Lily nodded tearfully. "You're too kind." Ethan stood there silently, the tension in his shoulders easing. For the first time, there was no anger, no resentment, just closure. After Lily left, Grace turned to Ethan. "She's lost too," she said softly. "Maybe now you can both start forgiving yourselves." He nodded. "I think I'm learning." A few days later, Ethan came home to find Grace sitting at the piano. She hadn't played in years, but her fingers still moved gracefully over the keys. "What are you playing?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Your father's favorite song," she replied, smiling. "He used to say it reminded him that no matter how far we wander, home is just a melody away." Ethan sat beside her, listening. For a moment, it felt as if his father was in the room too, the house filled with music, forgiveness, and peace. Grace finished the tune, then looked at him with eyes that shimmered like sunlight on water. "You've kept your promise after all, Ethan." He frowned softly. "What promise?" She smiled. "The one you made to your father the night before he died, that you'd take care of me. You broke it once, but love gave you another chance to keep it." Ethan looked at her, his throat tightening. "Then I'll never break it again." That night, as the rain tapped gently against the window, Grace placed the letter Ethan had found back in its box. This time, she added a second note beside it. "My son came home." The following week, Ethan helped organize a small charity event through his company, a foundation in his father's name, supporting single mothers who struggled to raise children alone. Grace attended, standing proudly beside him as he spoke. When the cameras flashed, Ethan didn't see reporters or investors. He saw one woman, his mother, the quiet hero who had built his world brick by brick. And as the applause filled the room, he turned to her and whispered, "You taught me everything that matters." Grace squeezed his hand gently. "No, Ethan, you taught yourself when you chose love over pride." That evening, they drove home under the setting sun. Grace looked out the window, her eyes soft. "You know," she said, "this house may not last forever, but what we built, that will." Ethan smiled. "The home we lost?" She shook her head. "No, the home we found again." The soft hum of the highway echoed as Ethan drove through the quiet countryside, the evening sun painting the sky in shades of gold and lavender. Grace sat beside him, gazing out the window, her expression calm but distant, like someone lost in 1,000 memories. For the past few months, things had been better. Their bond had healed, laughter had returned to the house, and for the first time in years, Ethan had learned what true peace felt like. But tonight, something in Grace's silence felt different. "Mom," he said gently, glancing her way, "you've been quiet all day. Is everything okay?" Grace smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the outline of the window. "Just thinking," she murmured, "about how far we've come, and how much we still have to do." Ethan reached for her hand. "We've got all the time in the world, Mom." She looked at him with that same tender smile, the kind that says, "I hope you're right." That night, after they reached home, Grace went straight to the piano room. She sat there for hours, playing softly, the same melody his father loved. Ethan stood quietly by the door, watching her. The notes filled the house like a whisper from the past, beautiful, fragile, and haunting. When she finally stopped, she turned to him. "Ethan, if something ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep this house." He frowned immediately. "Mom, don't talk like that." "I'm serious," she said gently. "This home isn't just wood and walls. It's where love grew and broke and found its way back again. Don't ever sell it, even if life changes." Ethan swallowed hard. "I promise, Mom, but nothing's going to happen." "You're fine," she nodded with a soft laugh. "That's what I told your father once, too." A few weeks later, Ethan was called away for a major business trip, his first in nearly a year. He didn't want to go, but Grace insisted. "You've worked hard for this, Ethan. Go show them who you've become." He kissed her forehead before leaving. "I'll be back before you miss me." "I always miss you," she whispered. The trip was successful, more than he expected. Ethan signed a partnership deal that could expand his company internationally. For the first time, he felt like he was building something meaningful, not for pride, but for purpose. But the victory felt empty without her. He called her every night and she always answered, her voice calm and steady until one night. She didn't. It was 9 p.m. when Ethan tried again. No answer. 2 p.m., still nothing. His heart began to race. By midnight, he was already in his car, driving through the dark highway, the phone ringing endlessly beside him. When he finally reached home, the house was silent. Too silent. He rushed inside, calling out, "Mom! Mom!" No reply. He found her in the living room, sitting peacefully in her chair, a blanket over her lap, and her glasses resting on the table beside a photo of his father. Her eyes were closed, and she was gone. Ethan's knees gave way. The world blurred around him. He buried his face in her lap, sobbing like a child, the kind of cry that comes from the deepest corners of a broken heart. "Mom, please no. You can't leave me again. Not now. Please." But there was only silence and the soft whisper of the wind through the curtains. The days that followed were a haze. The funeral was small, just close friends, old neighbors, and the Daniels family who had once given Grace shelter. Everyone had something to say about her kindness, her warmth, her ability to forgive. Mr. Daniels spoke last. "Grace wasn't just a mother to Ethan," he said. "She was a mother to anyone who needed one. She believed in second chances, and she lived long enough to see the one she prayed for." Ethan couldn't hold back his tears. But this time they weren't just for the loss, they were for gratitude too. For every lesson she left behind, After everyone left, Ethan sat alone in the backyard where she used to garden. The tulips she had planted were still blooming, pink, white and yellow, swaying softly in the evening breeze. In her room, he found another letter lying on her bedside table. My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then I'm finally at peace. I know you'll cry, but don't cry for me. Cry for the moments we lost and then live for the ones we found again. You kept your promise, my son. You became the man I always knew you were. Now keep one more. Love without fear, forgive without reason, and never forget where home truly is. Mom. Ethan pressed the letter to his chest and wept until dawn. Months passed. The house became quieter, yet warmer in some strange way, like she was still there, watching, guiding. He didn't sell it. He turned her piano room into a small foundation office. The Grace Walker Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers and children in need. He started funding small business grants, educational programs, and housing projects, all under her name. Every wall of that office carried her legacy. One day, as Ethan was organizing files, his young son, a curious 6-year-old, came running in. Dad! Look what I found. In his little hands was Grace's locket, the one she always wore. Ethan took it gently. Inside was a tiny picture of him as a child on one side, and his father on the other. He smiled. That belonged to your grandma, buddy. She was nice, right? The boy asked innocently. The nicest person I've ever known, Ethan said softly. Everything we have is because of her. The boy smiled wide. I wish I met her. Ethan knelt down, placing the locket around his son's neck. You did. She's right here, he said, pointing to the boy's heart. That night, Ethan sat by the piano. The house was quiet again, just like that first night when he had come back to find her gone. But this time, there was no emptiness, only peace. He pressed one key, then another, the melody his mother used to play. Slowly, it filled the air, soft and beautiful, and as the notes echoed through the house, Ethan whispered to the stars outside the window, Mom. I kept my promise. Years slipped away like pages in a fading book. The house, Grace's house, still stood tall on the edge of Maplewood Street, its white walls wrapped in ivy, its garden alive with tulips that seemed to bloom brighter every spring. Ethan had kept his word. Every flower, every photo, every melody that once belonged to his mother was preserved like a treasure, not out of sorrow, but gratitude. And in every corner of that home, her presence still lingered. Soft, invisible, eternal. Ethan's life had changed after Grace's passing. He became gentler, more patient, and above all, more present. He spent more time with his wife, with his son, Noah, ensuring he would never repeat the mistakes that once broke his own mother's heart. Noah was 8 now, curious, clever, and full of the same quiet warmth that once lived in Grace. He loved the piano, just like his grandmother, and every evening, Ethan would hear his small fingers pressing the keys with clumsy innocence. Dad, Noah asked one night, what was Grandma like? Ethan smiled softly. She was strong, buddy. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. Did she love you a lot? Ethan's throat tightened. More than I deserved. But I think she still does. Noah tilted his head, frowning a little. How can she love you if she's not here? Ethan looked out the window, the same one his mother used to stare from every morning. Because love doesn't stop, Noah. It changes shape, but it never disappears. Noah thought for a moment, then said quietly, Then I'll love her too. 10 years after Grace's death, the Grace Walker Foundation had grown into something she could have never imagined. What started as a small project in her old piano room became one of the most recognized community programs in the state. It provided shelter to single mothers, scholarships for children, and microloans for struggling families trying to build a future, just like Grace once did. Every anniversary of her passing, Ethan would host a small event in her memory. He never liked calling it a memorial. It wasn't about mourning, it was about celebrating a life that still gave life to others. This year was special. It was the Foundation's 10th anniversary, and for the first time, Noah was going to speak on stage. The hall was filled with warmth, soft lights, gentle piano music, and people whose lives had been touched by Grace's story. As Noah stepped onto the stage, his hands trembled a little, but his voice was clear. "Hi," he began shyly. "My name is Noah Walker, and I'm the grandson of Grace Walker. I never got to meet her, but my dad tells me she was brave, kind, and that she helped a lot of people, even when she had nothing." The crowd smiled, listening intently. "My dad says she believed that no one is too broken to start over. And I think she was right. Because every person here is proof that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It keeps growing, like her garden." He paused, glancing at his dad in the front row. Ethan's eyes were already wet. "So today I just want to say thank you to everyone who still believes in her dream. And thank you, Grandma, for loving us even from heaven." As the applause filled the hall, Ethan looked at his son. And for a moment, he swore he saw his mother's smile reflected in the boy's face. Later that night, father and son sat in the garden, where the tulips glowed softly under the moonlight. Ethan placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "You made her proud tonight," Noah grinned. "Do you think she heard me?" Ethan smiled. "She hears everything, especially the good stuff." They both laughed quietly. Then Noah looked up at the stars and whispered, "Good night, Grandma." Ethan followed his gaze, his heart swelling with emotion. "Good night, Mom," he said softly. Weeks later, while cleaning his mother's old chest in the attic, Ethan found something he had never seen before. A sealed envelope with his name on it, in her handwriting. The ink was faded, but her elegant script was unmistakable. He sat down, breath trembling, and opened it. "My Ethan, if you ever find this, it means I didn't get to say everything I wanted, so let me say it now. You were my greatest joy, even when you couldn't see it. I didn't raise you to be perfect. I raised you to be kind, to rise after every fall, to love even when it hurts. If you've forgiven me, then my heart is at peace. But if you've forgiven yourself, then you've truly grown. Don't let regret live longer than love. Don't let fear silence your music. And never forget, the best way to honor me is to live beautifully, with all my love, always, Mom." Tears fell freely as Ethan folded the letter against his heart. He went to the piano room, now filled with awards, photos, and memories, and placed the letter beside the old piano. Then he sat down and began to play. It was the same melody she had once played every evening, soft, timeless, eternal. Only now he wasn't playing for her. He was playing with her. Years later, time, as it always does, moved on. Noah grew up, strong, kind, and full of his grandmother's spirit. He took over the foundation after college, expanding it even further, introducing global programs for education and women empowerment. Under his leadership, the Grace Walker Foundation became a worldwide name. But no matter how big it grew, he never changed the old house's signboard. It still read. One summer evening, as Noah walked through the garden, his little daughter ran up to him with a bright red tulip in her hand. "Daddy, look, I picked this for you." He smiled and took it. "You know who planted these flowers?" She shook her head. "Your great-grandma Grace. She loved tulips." "Was she nice?" the little girl asked, eyes wide. "The nicest," Noah replied softly. "And she's the reason we help people today." The girl nodded proudly. "Then I want to help people too." Noah knelt down and hugged her. "That's the best thing you could ever do." That night, as the stars shimmered above the old house, Noah stood by the window, the same window where his father once stood, and where Grace used to dream. He whispered, "Grandma, your love never ended. It just kept finding new hearts." A soft breeze rustled through the curtains, and for just a second he felt it. A presence, gentle and familiar, like a mother's touch. The tulips in the garden swayed lightly. And somewhere in the distance, a piano played, slow, soothing, infinite. Decades later, the Grace Walker Foundation became a symbol of hope across the country. Every wall in its central hall bore her photo, smiling, peaceful, radiant, and Beneath it was engraved her favorite quote, the one she used to tell Ethan as a boy. "You don't need to be perfect to change the world. You just need to love without limits." People would stop, read it, and feel something shift inside them. That's how Grace lived. That's how she was remembered. Because love, real love, doesn't die. It just finds new hearts to live in.